podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. So before we get started with this week's episode, I just want to say thank you for listening, and there'll be more to come. As always, please take this conversation as a moment to reflect and join us just in some, serious discussion, but hopefully some reflection and some lighthearted banter of a positive sort. We do touch on today baby bonds, which is a policy issue, and also a couple other matters, in the world. As always, man, like I said, take the best part for yourself and, enjoy. So with that, I'm going to let us get on with the conversation. Peace. Peace. I'm Majestic.
My brother, Justice Rajee.
It's a glorious day in Zamunda.
It's a glorious day in Zamunda, that's right. Yeah. It's a black woman on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just as a close to that loop, it's sort of I just don't know how people what do they how do you be like, yo, she's super awesome and she's totally qualified, but yeah, I ain't gonna vote for her though. And and then be like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. You could at least just say, look, show me enough respect. Look, I'm just not voting for her because I don't want to vote for somebody who I don't think is conservative. And if when, I guess you say the other side is in a similar position, be like, yeah, we ain't voting for that person because we're liberals or we're whatever,
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Basically, because if a Republican didn't get a name, we ain't voting for him, and then vice versa. And then we could all at least respect that that's just what it is. Don't act like it's this moral. My values just won't let me pick this person. Your values be damned, my guy. Come on.
Well, they have, I will say, it's an interesting space of how they define. It's almost like a 2022 take on the Southern gentleman or Southern lady concept. I might be racist as all get out, but I will say please and thank you. Right? So it's
right, I won't be disrespectful.
Yeah, I won't be disrespectful. I might be cruel to you, but I won't be disrespectful. Right? Because it's okay, well, you're a great person to say and third, but it's not in my interest to allow you to be on the highest ruling court. Right? Because to your point, that's essentially what's being said. It's not to my interest for you to be there. So while you could be a great human being, I am aligned with my interests to this degree that I can't let you do that. Yeah. Right? And I mean, it's hardball and it's vicious because what then the supporters of them say, above all, they are civil. Right? And they juxtapose that versus when, quote unquote, the other side does people. And to be true, I think Democrats have to be honest. They get points for kind of stinging critiques of Supreme Court folks when they're on there, right? Mm-hmm. The people that support them want to hear them make stinging critiques, and that's fine. And what happens is the other side goes, no, we're not like them, but we're still not going to vote for you, right? And there's a article I just reread about Leonard Leo from the Federalist Society in 2017, and just the parameters and how they basically muscled presidents to realize that the Federalist Society did not support the person that they had up, like Bush. Bush had one or two people who didn't make the Supreme Court. Sometimes we can forget that.
Right.
Gonzalez, Myers didn't make it.
That's right.
Right? Because they were not deemed conservative enough by the Federalist Society. So it's just an interesting narrative, and I think we've talked before about how I think conservatives have done a really good job of kind of framing the political narrative that whatever doesn't fall within their thing is like out of bounds with American like thought. You know what I mean? So, shouts to Supreme Court Judge Jackson, for future Supreme Court, I guess, this whole process of how you actually get on the bench, right? But it like you've said before and you said earlier, someone with her credentials, frankly, should not have been subject to the goofy things about child pornography and stuff like that they were saying.
Yeah, and I just, we can move on. I just want to say this. It is absurd and ridiculous. And if anyone that's listening to this, you could play this for like your relative that might, if you actually think, like you actually have the nascent, because this is the crazy thing about wild stuff in our society. Is like, so what you're saying is the judge is somehow, you basically, because I would take it personally, you're basically implying I'm sort of down with child pornography. And I ain't with that. Like, I would take that as wild disrespect. Like, I'd be like, listen, man, you got like 2 more sentences before there's going to be some furniture moving in here. Because you're going way out of bounds. All right. Now, what you want me to do is do that. That's what you want me to do. So I'm going to say it in my calm and relaxed way. But basically, you are asserting that I am somehow down with pedophiles. And let me tell you something, Playboy. Nah, not cool. Right. So we're going to stop this whole line of conversation, or we're going to have a different meeting. You know what I'm saying? Like,
you would be like the Richard Pryor. You'd be like that Richard Pryor skit on the Richard Pryor show where he started talking one way, and then every time he kept talking, he kept being like, "All right, now, yeah, brother, Black Power." See, for the brothers in the back, and then by the end, he was going to fight the reporter.
Right.
The reporter asked him about his mama.
Yeah. Like took everything in me. All I could think was every time like, you soft on crime. It was about to be like, your mama soft on crime. Like, this is wildly disrespectful. Like, where are we going with this? and my thing is the fact that somewhere in a meeting, a group of people sat around and said, what's our strategy? Here's what we do. We're going to keep insinuating that she's down with pedophiles. Like, that's what we're going to do. And like people with haughty degrees and credentials and like that would go outside in our everyday life in our society, and people look, oh, that guy went to Harvard. He must be, he must have been a great student in high school. And he sat in them, because it wasn't, because who knows the gender of everybody that was in those meetings. But somewhere, someone has written down on paper the strategy to defame this person is we're all going to insinuate that they're down with pedophiles. I don't know, man.
I mean, it definitely goes back to Lee Atwater. I mean, you go back to Bush and yeah, I mean, this idea, I mean, that you paint Mike Dukakis, who seemed to be as regular and kind of normal a governor of a northeastern state that you're going to get.
Yeah.
That he let people out for murder and you know what I mean? Like in a character building, which has developed since then, frankly, on both sides. I mean, I think it's just part of our society, but to your point, I think there's a group of people who just keep that stain there, right? Like, we're just going to assert this and keep saying it so that there's someone sitting in some state. I'm not going to say what kind of state, because I don't want to frame one state is more classy than the other, because clearly, to your point, people go to these places and get all these degrees and still do grimy stuff, right?
Yeah, but no class.
So people are sitting somewhere and being like, oh, Democrats, in the way that they rule, probably like to let out people who are generally perceived as people who are anti-society. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that sticks for the next elections, right? They just did that for that, but they really did it for the midterm, right? They really did it for the next president, right? Like, so that's the, to your point, there's something to be said for just being like, you know what, this is going to be a grimy thing. Let's all agree it's going to be grimy and deal with it accordingly versus the civility of it when the underlying thing is still about power and influence.
Yeah. And that's why I just did like, we'll move on. Like, y'all just need somebody in the room to go. So what y'all are trying to say is, and I just want to put that on the record. I just want to say it out loud so it's on the record so that later we can look back at this, because this is what you're basically implying. Okay, so anyway, we're going to move on now, but that's some real clown stuff you're doing. And my thing is, for everyday person, like, do some examination of your personness. If you go, yeah, I bet you they are sort of, wait a minute, like, think about what you're saying. But, now that gets into other, this is not a conversation time for that, but the nuances of reprehensible behavior that flow through different parts of our society that is not always spoken of, depending on people's social circumstances and what they experience and trauma and pain. So there's a lot of other stuff there that we could unpack, but we're not going to do that right now because we're going to talk about baby bonds. All right. Yeah, I did that. Boom. Just moving on.
Boom. There you went.
So, and it's something. The conversation about the racial wealth gap, the structural inequities of the United States, the reparations conversation, and there's a particular piece around like the concept of baby bonds, which I'll give my basic understanding of it is that when similar to when basically when a child is born, that we as a society would basically open like an account, so to speak. And, like an actual account, not that fake one. Some of y'all be out here talking about there's an account for you at the Social Security office. Ain't no account for you at the Social Security office. Just like, the people, they be doing that thing with the straw man and all that tomfoolery. I'm just saying, I'm going to say it. If y'all got a problem with it, you come holler at me. So moving on. Right. But like an actual account basically as a strategy to create opportunity, especially for those, and for everyone that finds, so not just, Black folks, not just, the Latino community, or not just, but for everybody that when the baby is born, you start a little account or whatever, a little money goes in the fund, and that money grows, stays in that bond, with them till they turn, 18 or 20 something or whatever. And then that they would receive those funds to do with, as they wish, to go to school, start a business, get a training, whatever that may be, and as a strategy to create more basically financial, wealth equity in our society. Which I think the first time I read something about, there's a book, I don't know if I still have it here, I have to pull it out. But it was a couple folks out of Vermont, I think. Then they were talking about this as a concept. And particularly this article that I would put on the show links is feature, what's my man's name here? Let me go up here, boom, boom, boom. Derek Hamilton, who's an academic at the New School, and basically ideas, and there's a couple states that are putting together state level baby bond programs to test it out. But generally, what was some of your thoughts about, the baby bonds?
So, there's a couple of things. One, I think about, us being Generation X kids, and, the idea when people would give you like a bond, right? Like, somebody in your family would like, here's a bond, here's like a $50 thing. And then, I guess everyone trusted in American promise society that would grow, whether it did or not. That's another thing. But like, so I think there's a broad concept here. We have framed a narrative in America that the way to success is through hard work, and just give someone an opportunity and they'll make the best of it, which individually sounds great. Collectively, acknowledging that our society has needed and still needs, although it's going to change and is going to morph, cheap labor. And you need cheap labor to do a set of things. So if everyone's a lawyer, then lawyers don't make the same amount of money. If everyone became a doctor, doctors wouldn't make the same amount of money. It's just the nature of it, right? If everyone became a banker, there are not a lot of spaces for 2 million more people to become bankers, right? Mm-hmm. It just isn't. So we framed it versus opportunity, but that's the tip of the iceberg. Below it is the complicit role that government on a local, state, and federal level have played in the perpetuation of a group of people gaining wealth and other people not. And, in your show notes and things that we've talked about, history is replete with examples of this, right? And so that's almost like that's not a debate at this point, right? You could want to look at it one way, but that's not a debate. So the response, and we've had a lot of responses, and I'm going to say like post-Reconstruction, right? And I think it's important for people to look at post-Reconstruction, how we started framing what the solutions are, and in a way how they keep recycling, right? I want to save some of the Black Bank conversation for another time, but I will just say it's very interesting that in post-Civil War, Frederick Douglass was the president of the Freedmen's Bank, and now Killer Mike, Ryan Glover, and Ambassador Young are pushing Greenwood banking systems, right? Like, so we have these circular concepts, right? We also have the circular concepts around education, around what we think will reduce the gap, and sometimes I don't even think it's about reducing the gap anymore. Like, I actually don't buy that. I actually think that people are just saying, hey, we're never going to ever reduce the gap. We're just going to give some people opportunity to make some more money. Like, and I think those are two different things, because reducing the gap would mean that you're going to have some people make a substantive wealth development, a substantive wealth opportunity that, would really get them to the next level, versus we just want people to do a little bit better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because and I should clarify, it's not like it's not really a bond, meaning it's not a debted security or debt-based security. It is like an account. But the idea being, and I wanted to touch on what you said there around not really trying to close the gap. It's just sort of like, maybe this time, maybe in this round of the American experiment, we can not have the place where eventually we say, Black folks in particular, but other people doing so well that then we do something to basically undercut the wealth that they've developed, right? Because that's the
other part
thing
of the
that,
conversation,
right? That, like, and I repeat this because I hear people talk about the age of segregation and these other things and integration in these ways that I think are not historically sound, in that there's no time in American history when Black folks necessarily were just left to their own devices and not encumbered upon by the outside and surrounding world. Outside of the context of maybe being in maroon communities at different places, different times, but even then, the general idea is that they would inhabit a space that was out of reach, either due to, physical obstacle or the energy it would take to, go in there, so to speak, into the Great Dismal Swamp, or to try to manage all of the outlying islands of the Gullah Geechee cultures, or the, before what is now called Florida, came under the purview of the United States, of the federal government, among other places. Right. So the idea that, we, sort of like, oh, we just, we kind of pushed the Black folks over there and we just let them do their own thing. And then within that space, we just, we started building factories and doing this and doing that without any contact with the external world is just not accurate. That we've always had that presence, and the idea that, like, we're not, well, I don't want to say, I don't think in my lifetime I would see a reckoning of sorts of the realities of our society, where it's like, what we need to do? We need to all come around. We're gonna get in a circle. we're gonna chop this up, break this down, and figure out how we can get everybody in a place where they have what they need, and then the rules, and if that means some people got to hand over something, they got to put something in a pot, then we all gonna do that. I don't see it. Right. I have not seen that level of how you say, of, I don't know if magnanimous is the right word, but of, like, I'm so dedicated to the well-being of the life of humanity in this society that those of us who have a lot are willing to go, hey man, and not just through a charitable device and like to buy malaria nets or like some other thing, but like, no, we just gonna put $3 trillion in a thing and we're gonna start giving it out.
Well, that's my point. Like, that's the thing that I think we keep coming to in America around the conversation of this wealth gap and the struggle. So there's a wealth gap, and then there's a level of structural inequality that perpetuates that wealth gap. Mm-hmm. And then how we respond to the structural inequality as well as the wealth gap. So again, kind of giving where it's like we have a tax system that encourages you to make as much money as possible and then gives you a break on that money if you do things to usually give into people in some sort of programmatic function, right? Which is the other part, I think, of why the baby bonds conversation is important. Yeah. At some point, go ahead.
Oh, but and then the thing I think that just touching on that though is the idea that we have the capacity, or we could make the capacity to go. Let's basically, starting with some number generation, go. We're gonna make sure from this group at least going forward, when you hit a certain age, you're gonna have something in your pocket to make a decision in your best interest, whether whatever that may be. If it's education, if it's skills, if it's just taking the money and having something so that you have security, that you're not destabilized, financially. Which seems like a fair way forward, but it doesn't necessarily say that, like I said, we're going to take away from some other group that already has, or some individuals that have, and I think that's an important point to raise with it, because I think some will go like, that in order to give to some that you're taking from others, which is not necessarily the case.
Well, that's part of the narrative in our world, right? Because again, going back to kind of the conversation around Judge Jackson, it's any kind of shifting of resources gets framed as wealth redistribution, right? And so the idea, what people come to hear when they hear redistribution, is take from me to give to you, versus as a state, we're identifying, and again, that's why I make this distinction between programmatic stuff and just like wealth transfer or cash transfer, mm-hmm. right? The fact that we're at a place where cash transfer, whether through basic income programs, that we saw through the pandemic, that the reality of it is, if people are in a bad situation, the best thing to do, quote unquote, is to give them money, right? So that they can do something else. So we actually saw, and when I worked for the city and we were trying to work on a basic income program, you did run into all these people being like, so you're just going to give them money, right? Like, you're just going to give somebody money every month. And we were like, yeah, because they can stabilize themselves. It centers them in stabilizing themselves versus stabilizing the state or some form of structured program around how they would figure out their lot, right? Mm-hmm. So then we saw during the pandemic that the United States actually entered into a covenant to say, yeah, the best way to save everyone in the pandemic and in an economic crisis is just to give you money. Now, 30%, only 30% of the money in the stimulus money was ever spent, which I think later will come to be a whole nother conversation, that there was a wealth transfer to folks who never spent that money, which is, again, different dialogue for a different day.
Right.
But the baby bonds model to me is good because it says we didn't create a program for a training program. We didn't create a mentoring program. And obviously I love mentoring programs, have participated in a whole bunch of them, though I do think there needs to be a kind of resetting and reframing of what we're calling mentoring, and also moving to more sponsoring and not just mentoring. Because I think the challenge is, we put a young person in front of another person who ostensibly has made it or is slightly more mature than them. And then we say, hey, you'll just get better through gleaning this person. That assumes that this person's structure in life is as such where just being around them will help them grow, which I just don't see it, frankly. But in the numbers are on mentoring programs when it comes to certain groups of people just aren't in. right? As far as it being transformative. So anyway, like the idea to me of the bond is the state is going to do and spend resources for a group of people for what all the groups of people take for granted. Meaning there's going to be $5, $10, $15, $20,000 sitting somewhere at age 18, upon which you can then use your creativity and your ideas to do what you think makes sense with that resource based upon where you are. If it means you started a business, to your point, if it means you were training, but at least it gives that person the decision space to make that versus they get to a certain place and decide how much in debt they want to be to said university or program. Right? Because essentially when young people get to a certain place in our community, and this is not just like folks who are dealing with economic issues, all of our children, for the most part, it's the decision of like, who you want to go get in debt to. So if there's a space where folks of different means can make that decision, I think that's a really important shift along with basic income in how America deals with, again, I don't think it's shrinking the wealth gap per se. I think it's really about the space of how we're framing opportunity for people and moving past like scholarships and then different programmatic kind of state structured sponsored. Now, when I mean the state, I mean the bigger sense of the state, programs into a place of like, we're going to create a space where, hey, if you live here for this long, you get this cut, you get this much money, and now you're prepared to chase your dream and feel more a full member of society than people have. So
yeah. Well, and there's, to me, there's a bigger, there's a question or the thought of, what do we do that demonstrates that we're actually invested in like young people? Because like I said, a lot is made to do in our political system and in our society around, the interests of children. And often they're not really about the children. They're more about the sensibilities of adults. But, people go, well, I do this for the kids and we need the family time and, across the board, safety for the kids and this for the kids. And it'll be like, yeah, but the kids, where was well, none of y'all with the kids? People's with their kids, with their kids, the kids that were theirs, but they weren't necessarily, demonstrating that. Like it's sort of like we do this thing, and I've, especially like I've had, you've already had the child go through high school. I'm on the second child finishing high school, and the amount of conversations when you start talking about colleges and other things, and the narrative of like, and these kids work their butts off to get the great grades and to do this thing so they could go become super indebted at a selective university.
right.
And then, like it'd be it's a very, this, narrative, that the kids that, probably in many ways are, maybe relative degrees of points different, maybe if we were scoring in what they did or didn't do, is in like, yeah, and screw them kids. Them kids could go suck a rock. Like that's kind of like what we will imply. Like a kid who, for whatever reasons, usually reasons outside of their control, experience great hardship and harm, just trying to get through childhood, that then they get to, 18, 19, we go, hey man, I know you was, your mama died and your father, passed away due to this, and then you was with your aunt and your aunt got arrested. But hey, you was in the foster system for 7 years, but bootstraps, figure it out, buddy. Like, what I'm saying? And the collective idea, like what are our real values? We practice, as a sense of just how we live, that like, you show love to young people of all walks of life. Like if I see young people and like, oh, what y'all young people doing? Oh man, y'all having fun, man. Y'all have fun. If I had some waters or something, man, y'all young people take these waters. Like it ain't because I'm invested in one, I'm not foolish enough to not understand that some people, the people that are young, will be the people that are not young when I'm old. And so I should have, even, if you want to just have a self-interest angle for those of you that require that in life, like it's in your best interest to make sure the kids are cool, because eventually the kids will be the adults, and you'll need them to pick up, when you need to slow down. You know what I'm saying? And as a society, we, we say we do a great investment in education, some places more than others. Sometimes, but even very, I mean, I guess it's well documented the whole, like, there's a school and then a group of parents start a nonprofit organization to raise more money to pay for extra stuff for the school because, XYZ, if it's a public school. If it's private school, obviously, private schools operate on a whole different thing, right? But school alone is not sufficient necessarily to like raise children, right? Where do we demonstrate within like what we want for our kids and what we want our future to be, to go like, yeah, like, is there something set aside so that when they're ready to become adults, that they're not necessarily like overcoming this fantastic inertia, so to speak, just to kind of get their life moving where they want it to go. Now I'm sure there's an analysis all this that would go like, why are we so worried about people working or not working and these other things? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have the answer for that today. But the sense that I think about it for myself, if I knew when I turned, 19, I don't know, I feel like 18 might have been, I might need another year of seasoning, but for damn sure, if I knew when I turned 19, it was like, yeah, we're going to have 45 racks for you to use at your disposal to move, to get your life going, whatever that may be, if that's education, if that's, again, if that's, you want to try to go and buy property and live in it, whatever. It would change the dynamic of my life. Wouldn't have changed everything, but it would have made many things different because I would not have had to go, I don't have any money. I like I could have made those choices based from the position of having the means to like go like, well, I with my, you would think that then also your structure building up to that, at least people go, yeah. So when what do when you're 14, maybe somebody asks you, so what do you think you're going to do when you get your bond payout when you turn 19? You're like, I don't know. Like that'd be the mentoring program conversation, is like thinking about your future and like what you're going to do with this money. Which probably definitely has some weirdness to it in another sense, that like, if people thought of it in some sort of crime prevention-y kind of way, that just came to my head. But I'm thinking about it from a families, lots of regular folks who don't have any financial leverage to like kind of like make decisions about what they want to do with themselves, how to get out of certain situations, how to take care of their families, and even the sense of just like, I got something coming if I keep everything else in place, that I can then make another jump, right? Like I can, we can put that into fixing up the house, or so that the family can keep property in the family, or you can, if y'all done with city X, you're like, look, once all y'all hit this age, man, you go ahead and you flew the coop, man. You can bounce. You don't gotta be up in here no more. You can go wherever you want to go, because you're gonna have something to get moving with, some energy, and
well, there's a disillusionment conversation too now as you're talking about this, because I think again there was this contract that at a certain place the contract is broken, and I think we can see in a variety of ways how the contract has been broken. It's reflected in the general unhappiness of young people, right? It's been kind of documented that young people of this generation and are just generally unhappy. They're not happy campers. And they came into a country, and I'm just speaking economically here, that there were a set of premises. People would say, hey, if you go and get you a degree, you can go get you a job, right? And so you can pay back all the money you accrued in debt, and eventually you'll get free of that debt. And by that time, I guess you can get you a vacation home in Hilton Head, or wherever, insert place in your region, and then die, whatever. So cool. And that was a contract that it was a broader American contract. Now, if you were a farm worker, that really wasn't your contract. If you grew up in certain cities in America, that really wasn't your contract. If you were rural folks, that might not have been your contract. But that was the general premise of the contract. That contract has now, there is no semblance of that contract except for a certain group of folks who apply and go to a certain group of schools. So if the idea is for folks who have been disillusioned, been disconnected, to do this at a state level to provide resources. That is a space where you don't get a young person becoming disillusioned at 13 because they actually know that there's a resource for them along with whatever program that may be there, or mentoring program or sports program or art program that could change their life. There's also the reality of like, hey, here's a thing that you'll be able to build a life with. And I think that it's kind of even changes the tenor and the color of where people show up, right? Like, because you don't show up being like, okay, like you said, there's a part of this like, okay, hey, I worked really hard to then decide who I'm going to be $50,000, $100,000 in debt to,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's someone that does well in school.
Right.
If you do moderately well, you're debating who you're going to go in debt to and at what levels, and then who in your family, depending on the kind of debt you have to take on, who in your family is going to take on the debt for you, right? So I just think that the last thing I'll say about it is, again, I think the political ramifications of this conversation, baby bonds and other solutions, reflect where we are, where it's like you have to center people, but you have to center them in like a race neutral way, which again, I think there's some challenges around that, right? Like, we have to center you, but the way that we center you is like, here's a program, but we know the program is going to help these people the most. It might help some other people too, but we do know that the wealth gap or the opportunity gap is also aligned on racial lines, right? And so I think that there is this shift of how do you do that in broader systems, again, moving away from what I'm going to call like the civic aid part of it, which is, like I said, coming out of the settlement house programs, coming out of the Great Society programs, right? Where people essentially created programming to help groups of people do a thing, right? Hey, you want to be a construction worker. Hey, you want to do this. Hey, you want to buy a house, right? There's a set of programs that we created, maybe targeted programs, and shout out to John Powell for the targeted universalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that a lot of this stuff is the outgrowth of the work that they did at the Kerwin Center, and then the work they're doing now at Berkeley, of like, we're going to create a program that looks like it's for everybody, but we know it's going to impact these people more.
Right.
Which is what you kind of have to do politically in our systems in order to impact people who need support.
Yeah. And it's, the upside of the idea is, especially in our society, that, I mean, unfortunately, if you can affix a dollar value to something, then we people have been conditioned to respect it more. That it would be a substantive show of, look, not only do we say we care about you, we put something aside for you, right? Which I should add in the article that I'm gonna put the link to in the Bloomberg that say, which is a fundamentally conservative concept of like, we're not making new money. We're gonna take money when you're born. We're gonna save it. We're gonna take the money and leave it alone, like people should have done with Social Security back in the '80s. But I'm not going to bring that up, Reaganomics. Maybe I am. Yeah, I'm gonna bring it up.
Yeah, you had to get that in.
Yeah, I had to get that in because everybody just needs to remember, go do the research, understand that the problems with Social Security started because some people couldn't keep their hands off that money. They kept looking at it like, we should use that. And it was like, no, you shouldn't, because we're saving it. They're like, no, we should totally use it. And it was like, no, you shouldn't, because we're saving it. And they're like, no, it'll be fine. And then it wasn't fine. But anyway, the idea that, like, I mean, in many ways is what we would, what people and some folks claim, especially, poor and more economically challenged families, is that they should have saved more of their money, right? They should have lived within their means and these other things. And, coming from working class family, like where, folks saved what they could, right? And, given present conditions, like some didn't break on the house or some other thing didn't happen that was unexpected, or, that you did do the best you could, to have something for later. But the idea that you would have the economic largesse that you need to, like, kind of break you out of break through a different stratosphere where you'd have, the $60,000, which is not, well, I think the higher end would be like where it would be like a pretty large, up to $60,000, but you would need federal money for that. There's a couple state programs that Connecticut is mentioned in the article, in Washington State, that would maybe get up to 10,000, which, nothing to sneeze at. But for a lot of folks, $10,000 when you turned 18 would be fantastic, but you also would still know it's $10,000. Like, I'm gonna have to do something. Like, that ain't gonna last forever. Like that go faster than you think. You know what I'm saying? If you had to spend it immediately. But, generally the idea that we shift sort of the assumptions of our society to go, let's make sure that we've put something aside for people to act in their own interests. And, I think that is a really great idea. My most worrisome thing would be the industry that would grow up working hard to be the person to get your money as soon as you got it. Hopefully in a good way, but I'm sure there would be a fair amount of like, somebody's going to do what's the ones that do the you got a settlement and they'll give you money now so you can get your settlement later.
Absolutely.
That world, right. To protect, because somebody's got to make sure that a whole bunch of young people don't never, that they money somehow don't get, they got to write into those bills like, hey, nobody can sign this over to no one else, and it only, it only goes to this person when they turn 18. It can't go to their parents or nobody else, or wards of the court, like whatever the case may be. Because unfortunately, money, the other thing about money in our society is it brings the worst out of people. And there's, as much as I would love to assume, that like, oh, people would be virtuous and stand up, and there'd be somebody that's like, yo, what we could do? We could totally get, this person who's going through a hard time to sign this document. And then, kid finds out when they turn of age, oh yeah, actually somebody in your family got your money, got a percentage of your money so many years ago, and this is going to be remitted to us. And so we, those sorts of things, the preventatives would need to be in place, because, there would be a entire cottage industry. I mean, the same way that I think we've had a conversation about reparations on here. If there was a reparations check coming out, like everybody, like we went through reparations, got settled, we came to an understanding, there was going to be checks dispersed, there would be people lined up with all kinds of ways to try to get that money out of people's hands as fast as they could and back into, wherever it had came from, in terms of the federal government. And, and not necessarily in a good way. And so, try to be positive, but also I'm like, yeah, I don't trust everybody. And so, but I love the idea, you know what I'm saying? And I think especially tied in with other planning, I think I said, if we really want a future that's different, we got to plan, you know what I'm saying, and put something aside for the kids. And some of these kids is definitely on, like, don't just tell me you want me to have a great future, man. Show me the money, man. Show me something. Like, let me, show me some evidence that you're invested, in my well-being and my future. So, yeah, baby bonds.
Boom.
Lay it flat. So, and we're going to try to handle this conversation with, all right. So this weekend or last week, I guess it was in a club in DC, but the artist, the young man that passed, and I don't totally remember. I got one of the things about the brother's passing, but basically, the viewing, I guess we could say, for a young rapper artist, he was a musical artist, from the Baltimore area, and they had, basically a viewing of sorts. And it was viewing in a club in DC, and it made the rounds on the internets, and people, clutched their pearls and were upset, and other things. But I'm gonna start with this, and I'm gonna say this: if first of all, like, it's like if you ain't talked to his people, because the common thing to do in these situations is to go, maybe his people wasn't down with that, right? And by his people, I mean like his moms, his mom, dad, aunt, uncles, whomever, his closest survivorship of family. And then like if they were cool with it, right, is then we go to the like, well, it's still just, we basically started having the conversation we had about the our national nightmare of Will Smith slapping Chris Rock, of, this makes people look this way, this people look that way. I'm gonna just say, listen, if his moms and his folks and the people that were there that loved, because I didn't know the brother, so if the people that was there was singing his songs and dealing with their grief in a manner that maybe may not be my way, I feel like I don't want to be too judgmental about it. It's wild. I ain't never seen nothing like that necessarily. But on the other hand, I'm like, what they say, you gotta live your truth. You know what I'm saying? So, I'm gonna start there. What?
So there's a couple things about it. And to your point, I think once we accept that there are alternative ways of doing things, maybe beyond, what are traditional mores, then you have to be prepared for what comes from that, right? Like you can't talk about being open and creative and, like, to your point, like, hey, we can talk about baby bonds, but you can't be blind to the fact that you might have an industry of people that try to take 40% of the kids' money before they turn 18, right? By giving the family a loan or something. Like you can't be closed off to that. So in the same way, when you have this idea of, young people who have effectively decentralized and deconstructed the idea of traditional Black Christian funerals, right? Let's just call it what it is. They've deconstructed the idea of Black Christian funerals, when before everybody comes to a funeral in, dark clothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now everybody comes to a funeral in rest in peace t-shirts and maybe that person's favorite pair of sneakers, right? Like, it just has shifted.
Yeah.
So if it shifted to that happened, let's also acknowledge that the way that people might want to mourn has shifted, regardless if I find it to be necessarily the way I would want to mourn someone I care about, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it's an interesting parallel here. So to your point about this, and you can, it's being viral, it's being transferred all through social media. The South Side, which I think is one of the funniest new comedies, absolutely hilarious, had a very similar, number one party promoter that really kind of touched on this idea of the new funeral, right? And how funerals are evolving in the Black community. And I think, again, if you're not really seeing it, you might miss how funerals are evolving, where they had a dude standing up and, sitting in the club.
Yeah.
Dead.
Yeah. It was
right? Like dead in the club, like sat up, funeral director, figured out how to do it, put it on, made it viral, like brought a dude down, to in the club, dead, like hold it, right? You know what I mean? Where, there's a place where we may say where this come from, but I think it's also important, and in the show notes we share this. It is important to know that in 1984 in South Side of Chicago, there was a fellow named Willie the Wimp, right? And he was the son of Fluky Stokes, who was a well-known gangster. He was killed, and Willie the Wimp was buried in a Cadillac crypt. Mm-hmm. He was buried sitting up looking at a Cadillac, right? And this was in 1984. Mm-hmm. So this is almost 40 years. This is 40 years ago. This is not like new, right? And so it was extravagant. Chi-Town do it like Chi-Town do it then. But I do think it's like I want to be careful to how I frame it. I want to, like, to your point, I want to be careful how much I judge it, but I also people should also remember that funerals and consecrations and ways that we define people, they don't go away. So it's not like just the event you had now. It's the event of, like, this is how this person was seen. So if they were standing in the club with an Amiri shirt on while everybody sang their song, right? Their child sees this too, their uncles, their nephews, like, like what does it mean, right? So while I understand and appreciate the kind of deconstruction of the traditional Black Christian funeral, it also reverberates as an event of culture, right? It reverberates as an event of beyond, like, here's what you might have thought was cool to do at 24, but did you think it was cool at 44 or 54 or 64, right? In regard to how you celebrated this person. So I think it's like one of those when art and life are much more connected than I think many people think of, and even somewhat you might consider the absurd is actually occurring. Because when Southside did it, and again, it was masterful how they did it, there's some context from Willie that went from 84, but besides that, it's like, what is this? But this, like, no, then someone in Baltimore, DC does the exact same thing and sings the person's songs while they're standing in effigy.
It's the thing of, and I think we touched on this a little bit we've touched on it in other conversations, that the public embrace of sort of like the derivation, the differences in the way folks move through the world. It may be just maybe a piece of the concept, but like there's many ways to be Black as Black people, and other folks too, because I'm sure other people got some interest in that. I mean, and I think, and I can't remember the particular country or culture, but I know that there is either a Central American culture or community or South American state. I've seen it basically where they part of the person's last days, in the viewing, would be putting them in a way doing something that they did in life, right? Then in the image I remember particularly is like, I think the cat was like playing cards, and they have him at the table playing cards the way he would play cards when he was alive. It's like a part of the process of his last rites before they buried the body. It ain't as it's not as outlandish as it may seem, in that sense, right? It is, and then it gets into, which I think would be something that is always important to me, is like, what are the terms of how folks move through life that they have agreed to, and then so then when you see him do it, you go like, well, damn, like your first reaction might be like, why would they do that? And I wouldn't expect, like, I'm sure my mom would be like, wait, they had that baby where? They had the baby. Was his mom okay with that? Like, I'm sure my mom probably would take some convincing to be okay. You know what I'm saying, with that. And that's okay, right? It's all right to have that, that we don't all agree. But it's a very, and I can speak to this just from experience, like especially if you're not connected to the person, and you trying to understand the way the people that love the person and how they feel, is it's it gives me the space to go like, I don't have to make a decision about this. I just need to explore it, and I'll just be present. I will say, and then I would strongly suggest, if you've never watched The South Side, and particularly Chicago's #1 rap promoter episode, there's a whole lot of other things, because it touches on sort of the cultural, you just spoke to, sort of the cultural phenomenon of someone's relevance in a space or a city or a town or area, and that when someone passes, if they have a meaningful space in the culture, whatever that, in the culture in this sense being the culture of the area or society as a general sense, not in a specific sense, people may feel moved to come to those services. Then people also sometimes want to be involved for reasons that aren't so savory, but they still want to be involved, right? If someone is a national public iconic figure, so to speak, when they pass, everybody wants people come out to the streets, and might, if there's a procession or something of that nature, if there's, you name it, there are things that happen when folks die and when folks lose their life, and especially, and I should add that the young man was shot, and wasn't mentioned in actually some of the first times people brought it up. So unfortunately, this young man lost his life, violently. It's a shock to the system to see, but I want to try to be compassionate that hopefully for those closest to him, maybe that gave them a way to move away from losing him without, with some sense of closure. It's almost so a part of almost like, why did somebody have to tape it? Like, you ain't need to share it with us, which gets into people's fascination with having to share everything. Like, I gotta share everything. Like, maybe you could have kept that to yourself. Like, we didn't really need that. Was like, it seemed like it lost a level of sacredness. Now you done put it on the internet. You know what I'm saying? Now it's floating on the internet for all prosperity. Like, maybe that's the hole in the situation. But yeah, man, Baltimore, the DMV and the surrounding areas, like, a lot going on there.
The understatement of the year. That was the understatement of the first 4 months of this year.
As understatement, I'm trying to,
No, I mean, I think to your point, once we start to re-identify things that are important to us, we have to kind of do a deeper dive. And I think to your point, okay, do we now have a different way we see how we celebrate people's lives? Are we kind of going to do it in unique ways? Are we going to do it in ways that are honorable to that person now and forever? What does that mean? What does that look like? Right. And it's not about, again, the white gaze. It's about the gaze of the shared collective interest of the people who are mourning, but also looking to make sure they're thinking about mourning in perpetuity, not mourning in perpetuity, but thinking about the event in perpetuity, right? Thinking about how we celebrate life, right? And it's not like I said, it's not necessarily a judgment, but I think to your point, when the other parts of current society start to come in on it, like it's done at a club, people are taping and filming, this person has the newest clothes on, which again, it's the same thing that happened with Willie the Wimp. I mean, he had, they had a silk suit made for his funeral. Mm-hmm. So that's just, I think, what we need to think about as a society about what we think is important today, what we think will be important tomorrow. Because to your point, the children of today become the adults of tomorrow. And so the decisions that we make today are not just today's decisions. Mm-hmm. They are the decisions of a society and of a people who are, through explicit and implicit ways, affirming what's important.
Well said. So, well, I think with that, we can come to a close for the day. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
So with that, I'm saying peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, I'm Majestic. The Ask Your Oldhead podcast is a creative project started by myself. Good Brothers is the conversations between me and my good brother, I'm Majestic, that appears here. And I hope that it is a good experience for all who take the time to listen. You can support the podcast by, number one, listening, sharing, but also you can financially support by becoming a patron on Patreon. You can also look up the Etsy shop and buy something. And, but all that is whatever it is, man. As this project finds its next path, and as I continue to work on this, my most appreciative thing is that those who listen, and those who find something useful from these conversations and something valuable, share it with others who you think may find value. In the meantime, please be safe out there. And again, congratulations to not Chief Justice, but I guess Justice Ketanji Jackson. And, we look forward to see what happens, next with that, with her and her work on the Supreme Court. And I'm just meandering and rambling at this point. So I'm going to bounce out and just say, be safe and be well. Brother's going radio silent, actually, though, for about 3-4 days, going out to the woods. And I'm not going to be on the internet. So, y'all be cool. Peace.